So I have to admit that when it comes to the Christmas Mass, and in particular the Christmas homily, I tend to psych myself out. And this happens every year. And so for the longest time, I'm thinking to myself, well, I got to talk about this and that, and this has to come before that thing. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, wait a minute, I'm the pastor of St. James. I can talk about whatever I want. The whole reflection is about a movie. You might have actually seen this one too. So it came out in 2004, starring Tom Hanks, Catherine Zeta-Jones, directed by Steven Spielberg. It's about this guy who lives in an airport for several months. It's called The Terminal. Has anyone seen it? Okay, well, that's embarrassing. As a matter of background, Tom Hanks plays this guy named Victor Dvorsky. And basically, he's flying from his home country of Krakosia to New York, JFK Airport in New York City. And while he's in the air, there's a military coup in Krakosia, as a result of which Krakosia loses its diplomatic status. And so he falls into this legal loophole. Because of the situation back home, he can't go back home to Krakosia, nor can he enter the United States. And so he's forced to basically live in the airport lounge of JFK Airport for months. He's walking around in his bathrobe, he's trying to sustain himself by eating crackers with ketchup and mustard, and he has all these really awkward conversations with people with his broken English and his funny accent. And so if you were to ask me back in the day, what did you think of the movie? I would have said, yeah, it was okay. Like funny, entertaining, but ultimately forgettable. And years passed, and I saw it again when I was a priest. This movie is amazing in a way that I didn't appreciate when I was in my 20s. So imagine, here's this guy, again, he doesn't speak English, and basically the airport authorities are explaining to him this really complicated situation involving Krakosia, and they just send him into the airport lounge. And they know he doesn't understand what's going on. They give him some food vouchers, calling card, a pager, and that's it. And he has no clue what's going on until he watches the TV screens. He sees scenes of violence in Krakosia, and he realizes something is up. And so he's terrified, and he's running around the airport lounge looking for people to help him, and no one will help him. Everyone's indifferent, and in fact, a lot of people are more than indifferent. A lot of people are irritated. I see that you're scared. I see that you're in need. I could help you, but I choose not to because I'm caught up in my own thing. And so, again, indifference and sometimes overt hostility. Like shades of the Nativity story. You think about the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and obviously the child Jesus. What does Joseph want for his family? I just want someplace safe for my wife. I want someplace comfortable so Christ can be born. And he doesn't get that. Christ is born in this little manger, in this dingy little stable. And later on, King Herod is trying to persecute the Holy Family, so they have to go to Egypt. Egypt of all places. Historically hostile to the people of God. They don't know the people. They don't know the language. They don't know the culture. They had to stay there for literally God knows how long before returning back from Egypt. This is the Holy Family. Holiness in the midst of the people of God, and people don't recognize them. They don't recognize Christ amongst the poorest of the poor. Now, another thing I didn't notice with regards to this movie, this recurring theme of waiting, which again is a very distinct biblical theme, especially when it comes to Christmas. You think about the Nativity story. There are many moments throughout the story where there are key events in the context of the narrative. The Annunciation, the Visitation, the birth of Christ, and so on and so forth, right? But if you read between the lines, there are many moments of waiting. We're waiting to process this thing which has just happened. We're waiting to digest these words which have just been said. We're waiting to figure out what to do next in the midst of these really chaotic times. Waiting, waiting, and waiting. And the invitation and the challenge is to recognize that this is precious time. This too is holy ground. And so we're meant to receive it as such. And you see this in the context of the movie. The most obvious example is the fact that Victor Dvorsky is waiting for months in this airport lounge. But even that is kind of brilliant, right? He has every opportunity to leave. And in fact, the airport authorities, they kind of want him to leave. At a certain point, they say, well, look, at noon, the airport guards, they're going to leave, and you can just leave illegally. And he thinks about it, but then all of a sudden he realizes, no, there's something to be said about good process. I could leave, but I know it's wrong. There's something to be said about waiting until the appropriate time. I can force the issue and say I'm trying to be efficient, I'm trying to get things done. But in reality, it would be symptomatic of my own impatience. So when I think about it, I pray into it, I realize, no, the correct thing to do is to wait, even though I'm living in tension, even though I don't know what's going to happen next. You see this theme of waiting play out in various subplots. Victor Dvorsky, he goes to this immigration officer every single day. He's got to wait for 2 hours or so to talk to this lady. And the hope is that maybe today will be different. Maybe today she'll give me permission to finally enter the United States. And every time it's like, no. Along the same lines, he plays matchmaker, involving this immigration officer, but also this baggage handler. And they're young, and so they want to press the issue, they want to meet in person, but he encourages them to wait. Wait until the appropriate time, because if you push too hard and too fast, you're going to ruin the overall beauty of the thing. Even for himself, he develops this romantic relationship with this really pretty flight attendant played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. The character's name is Amelia Warner. And so even just think about her job, right? So for them to meet, to have a conversation, to go on a date, he has to wait for upwards of like 13 weeks. And then over the course of their many conversations, they talk about waiting. So she has this really great line. So she says, well, look, everyone is waiting. She says, everyone's waiting for something. But the difficulty, the real tragedy is a lot of people don't know what they're waiting for. And then for himself, he explains the reason why he's in New York to begin with. So basically, just to kind of paraphrase what he says is like, look, 1937, my father was reading this Hungarian newspaper. And he saw this photograph. It was a photograph of 57 really famous jazz musicians. And my father stared at this photo for 7 days. And all of a sudden, he had this idea in the back of his head, I want to get the signature of all these guys in this photo. And so my father started writing letters. And then he waited. My father waited for days and weeks and months and years. My father waited for 40 years. Then the signatures started coming in, one by one. And my father got all the signatures of all these men in this photograph, except for one, Benny Golson. And then my father died. And Benny Golson is playing in the Ramada Inn in New York City, and that's the reason I'm here. And so Catherine Zeta-Jones, her character has taken this all in, and she's like, whoa, so you're going through all this stuff, you're doing all these things for your father? And then he says, there's a part of me that thinks that he's doing it for me. Now this gives rise to this really dramatic scene. It's the final scene in the movie. So the war in Krakosia is over. He gets this emergency visa, and he's able to enter into the United States. So he goes to New York, he goes to the Ramada Inn, he goes to this jazz lounge, and there's Benny Golson, right? The scene is kind of funny depending on how you look at it, right? So Benny Golson has no idea what this guy's gone through. He has no idea he's lived at the airport lounge for like months, you know? And so Tom Hanks, he goes up to Benny Golson, and he has a lot of emotion in his voice. He explains the whole thing about his father. My father's a huge fan. I'm just wondering if I can get your signature. And at that moment, Benny Golson's like, wow, jazz fan, that's fantastic. And then he hears music playing in the background. And he's like, oh, you know what? We're about to start. Would you mind waiting? I remember when I was younger, I saw that scene. I was like, no! Just give him the damn signature. But then later on, I saw it. It's like, no, that's right. That's right. I mean, just play it out in your mind, right? What if he went, okay, my father, blah, 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 signature, gets it, leaves. No, that wouldn't have been right. And Tom Hanks, he plays it perfectly in that scene, right? You look at his character. Would you mind waiting? Sure. Like he's not upset, he's calm, he's steady, he's not anxious, no suppressed anger. This quick moment of discernment. No, it is right that I sit here and I wait. And again, it makes sense, right? Here's this guy, this iconic jazz musician. It is fitting and right that I sit here and listen to him do his thing. To understand why people cherish this man so much. to see him express the core of his being through the craft of song. And so, yes, it is God's will that I sit here and listen to beautiful music. I think a lot of times when it comes to waiting, we're frustrated because we think nothing's happening. I think on some level, too, we think we're being generous with the Lord. Look at me, Lord, I'm being patient. I'm persevering in faith, right? You got to keep in mind that God's grace and his love, these things are present not simply in overt manifestations of his grace, but these things are also present in the waiting. And so if you're invited to wait, it might be a period, it might be a season of waiting, but you got to recognize that this too is sacred time, and this too is holy ground. And even though you might feel like you're doing God a huge favor, the benefit entirely incurs unto you.